First story, by Emily Davis. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun and adventure. My friends and I had decided to go camping in the remote woods of upstate New York. We had heard tales of the stunning wilderness and wanted to experience it for ourselves. Little did we know, our trip would take a terrifying turn. We arrived at our chosen campsite late in the afternoon, set up our tents, and gathered around a crackling campfire. The night was clear, and the stars twinkled above us. We were surrounded by the soothing sounds of the forest, and we couldn't have been happier. As the night wore on, we shared stories, laughed, and roasted marshmallows. Around midnight, most of my friends decided to turn in for the night, but Jake and I, the more adventurous ones, decided to take a night hike. We grabbed our flashlights and began to trek deeper into the woods. The woods were different at night, with shadows that seemed to come to life. The rustling leaves and occasional hoot of an owl made the forest feel alive. We were engrossed in our conversation when suddenly the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and we felt a strange sensation like we were being watched. Jake's flashlight flickered, and mine followed suit. We checked the batteries, but they were brand new, and there was no reason they should be dying so quickly. It was unsettling, but we brushed it off as a strange coincidence. As we continued our hike, we heard distant whispers. It was impossible to make out the words, but the eerie sound sent shivers down our spines. We couldn't locate the source of the voices, and we began to question whether other campers were wandering around this late at night. The idea of other people in the woods at that hour was unsettling, to say the least. Feeling a growing sense of unease, we decided to turn back and head towards our campsite. But the further we walked, the more lost we became. The woods seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and we couldn't find any familiar landmarks. Panic set in, and we quickened our pace, but the disorienting feeling persisted. We heard the whispers again, this time closer and more distinct. It was as if someone was following us, hiding just out of sight. We couldn't see anyone, but the presence was undeniable. As the whispers grew louder, we finally caught a glimpse of movement among the trees. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods and masks. Our hearts raced as they approached, and the realization dawned on us that we were not alone. The strangers said nothing, but their presence was menacing. They began to circle us, their whispers turning into eerie chants. We were trapped, our flashlights failing, and our cell phones displaying no signal. It was a terrifying situation, and we had no choice but to face the unknown. In a desperate attempt to escape, we made a run for it. The strangers pursued us through the dark woods, their chants growing louder and more chilling. We stumbled and fell several times, but the fear gave us the strength to keep going. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clearing, and in the distance, we spotted the faint glow of our campfire. We sprinted towards it, and the strangers seemed to stop pursuing us once we were back in the light. Our friends were still asleep, oblivious to the horror we had just experienced. We decided not to wake them and waited until morning to share our story. We packed up our campsite, and as we left, we couldn't help but wonder about those mysterious figures and their unsettling presence in the woods. To this day, we're unsure of who those people were, what their intentions were, and what would have happened if we hadn't escaped. Our camping trip had turned into a nightmarish encounter with something inexplicable, leaving us with a lingering sense of dread. Second story, by Daniel Mitchell. A few years ago, my girlfriend, Sarah, and I decided to embark on a camping trip in the remote woods of Montana. We were both nature enthusiasts and looked forward to a peaceful weekend away from the hustle and bustle of the city. We arrived at a picturesque campsite nestled near a pristine lake. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine trees filled our nostrils. It was an idyllic setting, and we couldn't wait to spend the night under the starry sky. After setting up our camp, we decided to take a moonlit hike along the trails surrounding the lake. The night was calm, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. We held hands and shared quiet conversation, feeling the serenity of the moment. As we ventured deeper into the woods, we started to notice an odd occurrence. The temperature began to drop drastically. It was a clear summer night, so there was no reason for such a sudden change in weather. We could see our breath as the air turned frigid. The trail was becoming harder to follow as the moonlight dimmed, and we soon found ourselves in near total darkness. We decided to turn back and head for our campsite when we heard a strange sound. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything we had ever heard before. The hair on the back of our necks stood on end, and our hearts raced. We fumbled for our flashlights and aimed them in the direction of the noise. To our horror, we spotted a pair of glowing eyes in the underbrush. The eyes glimmered an eerie shade of green, and their gaze was fixed on us. We couldn't make out the shape of the creature, but its menacing growl grew louder and more threatening. With trembling hands, we backtracked, keeping our flashlights on the creature. It began to stalk us, moving in and out of our field of vision, never coming too close but ensuring that we knew it was there. We were lost in the dark, surrounded by an unknown predator. As we continued our retreat, we came across a dilapidated cabin hidden in the woods. Desperation forced us to seek shelter inside, hoping that the creature would lose interest. The cabin was a scene out of a horror movie, with cobwebs, broken furniture, and a musty, oppressive atmosphere. We barricaded ourselves in and waited in fear, listening as the growling outside grew more distant. The night seemed to stretch on forever as we remained trapped in that creepy cabin. We had no way of knowing if the creature had left, or if it was still lurking in the shadows. At the first light of dawn, we gathered our courage and cautiously ventured outside. The creature was gone, and we made a run back to our campsite, packed up, and left without looking back. To this day, we have no idea what we encountered in those woods. It was an experience that left us shaken and bewildered, and we could never find an explanation for the chilling encounter with that mysterious, otherworldly creature. Third story, by Mark Johnson. My camping trip in the rugged hills of Oregon was supposed to be a much-needed escape from the stress of everyday life. Little did I know that it would turn into a nightmarish experience I'd never forget. I had chosen a remote camping spot near a river, where the sound of flowing water was soothing. I was alone, seeking solitude and self-reflection. The first day went smoothly, and I set up my camp with ease. I spent the afternoon fishing by the river, basking in the beauty of the natural surroundings. As evening approached, I decided to go for a peaceful night hike. The moon was bright, and the stars shone brilliantly in the clear sky. The woods were serene, and I felt a deep connection with nature as I wandered through the forest. However, my tranquility was shattered by an unsettling sight. In the distance, I spotted a flickering light among the trees. It wasn't the gentle glow of a campfire. It was a harsh, electric light that seemed out of place in the wilderness. I approached cautiously, curiosity getting the better of me. As I got closer, I realized the light was coming from a small clearing in the woods. What I saw there made my blood run cold. A group of people, dressed in tattered clothing, stood in a circle around a large, intricately carved wooden structure. In the center of the clearing, a fire burned with an intensity that seemed unnatural for a simple campfire. The people were chanting in a language I couldn't understand, their voices eerie and unnerving. I hid behind a tree, my heart pounding as I watched their strange ritual. They raised their hands toward the sky, and the flames of the fire roared higher, casting grotesque shadows on the trees. I couldn't make out their faces, but their presence felt malevolent. As I continued to observe, one of the individuals broke away from the group and began to approach my hiding spot. I held my breath, terrified that I'd be discovered. My instincts told me that I needed to leave immediately. I carefully retreated from the clearing, my footsteps as silent as possible. I made my way back to my campsite and hastily packed my belongings. My mind raced with fear, and I didn't dare look back. The chanting and eerie glow of the fire stayed with me as I hurried through the dark forest. I could hear their voices growing fainter behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, somewhere in the woods. I eventually made it to my car, never looking back, and sped away from that nightmarish scene. I didn't know who those people were or what their intentions were, but I had no desire to find out. The memory of that terrifying encounter still haunts me to this day, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had been discovered in the woods that night. Fourth story, by Jessica Parker. My friends and I had decided to go camping in the sprawling wilderness of Colorado. We were avid outdoor enthusiasts and looked forward to a weekend of hiking, camping, and immersing ourselves in the beauty of the Rockies. However, what started as an adventurous getaway soon turned into a spine-tingling experience we would never forget. We had chosen a campsite in a remote area of the forest near the small town of Crested Butte. The first day was full of excitement as we explored the hiking trails, took in the breathtaking views, and enjoyed the tranquility of the great outdoors. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter. As the night grew darker, my friends decided to turn in for the night, leaving me alone by the fire, gazing at the starry sky. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It was the perfect moment for self-reflection and peace. I decided to take a solo night hike along a trail that led deeper into the forest. The moon was high, and I felt a sense of wonder as I made my way through the woods. But as I walked further into the darkness, a subtle unease began to creep over me. I started to notice strange rustling sounds in the underbrush, accompanied by faint whispers that carried on the night breeze. At first, I brushed it off as the sounds of nocturnal animals, but as I continued, the whispers became more distinct, and their tone grew ominous. I couldn't decipher the words, but the eerie feeling that I was not alone in the woods intensified. My flashlight began to flicker, and I checked the batteries, but they were fresh and should have lasted longer. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring to keep me in the dark. Despite my growing unease, I pressed on, determined to find out the source of the whispers. The trail seemed to stretch endlessly, and the sense of isolation was overwhelming. The woods seemed to close in around me, and I felt as if I were being watched. As I continued, the trail suddenly opened up into a small clearing, and that's when I saw them. A group of people, dressed in dark clothing, stood in a circle, their faces obscured by masks. In the center of the clearing, a bonfire blazed, its flames casting eerie shadows. The people were engaged in a bizarre ritual, their voices rising in a haunting chant. I watched in terror as they raised their arms toward the sky, and the fire roared higher, its flames dancing wildly. The air was thick with tension, and their presence felt malevolent. I had to know what was happening, but as I stepped closer to get a better look, a twig snapped loudly beneath my foot. The group turned toward me in unison, their masked faces now staring directly at me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Without a word, they began to move toward me, their steps deliberate and menacing. In a panic, I turned and fled, the sound of their footsteps and eerie chanting echoing in my ears. The forest was a labyrinth in the dark, and I desperately tried to find my way back to the campsite. My flashlight continued to flicker, and I could hear their voices drawing nearer. I felt a growing sense of dread as if they were closing in on me. It was a race against time to escape the mysterious group and reach the safety of my camp. In the distance, I finally spotted the faint glow of our campfire. I sprinted towards it, the sound of pursuit fading behind me. My friends were still asleep, unaware of the terror I had just encountered. I woke them, and we hastily packed up our camp and left the site, never looking back. To this day, I can't explain who those people were, what their intentions were, or what would have happened if they had caught me in the woods. My camping trip turned into a nightmarish ordeal, and the memory of that chilling encounter still haunts me. Each of these stories offers a unique and eerie experience related to camping, night hikes, or sleeping in nature, with an emphasis on realism and a sense of impending danger. They aim to keep the reader in suspense and deliver a thrill without resorting to supernatural elements. Fifth story, by Samantha Turner. My camping trip in the woods of North Carolina started as a picturesque adventure. My boyfriend, Ethan, and I had decided to spend a weekend in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We set up our campsite near Clingman's Dome, and the breathtaking view of the mountains promised an unforgettable experience. The first day was filled with hiking and exploring the stunning scenery. As night fell, the stars above us seemed to shine more brightly in the clear sky. Our campfire crackled, and we cooked dinner as we reveled in the peacefulness of the forest. After our meal, we decided to take a night hike along the Appalachian Trail, which passed near our campsite. The moon was nearly full, and we used our flashlights sparingly, allowing our eyes to adjust to the dim light. The quiet of the woods was both serene and eerie. As we walked deeper into the forest, the trail became more isolated, and we felt a sense of isolation we hadn't experienced during the day. The sounds of the forest took on a different quality in the dark, and the rustling leaves and distant owl hoots became more sinister. The temperature began to drop noticeably, and I shivered despite wearing warm clothing. I glanced at Ethan, who was also looking uneasy. We brushed it off as the natural chill of the mountains at night, but something about it felt off. Further down the trail, we heard a faint, rhythmic drumming sound that seemed out of place in the wilderness. It was as if someone were playing a tribal beat in the distance. We exchanged puzzled glances and decided to investigate. As we ventured closer, the drumming grew louder, and we spotted a flicker of firelight through the trees. Our curiosity got the better of us, and we made our way to the source of the sound. In a small clearing, we found a group of people gathered around a roaring bonfire, their faces painted with strange markings. They wore tribal clothing and chanted in a language we couldn't understand. The rhythmic beat of their drums seemed to synchronize with our racing hearts. We stood hidden in the shadows, watching as the group's chant grew more intense. Suddenly, they began to dance wildly around the fire, their movements wild and erratic. We couldn't tear our eyes away from the bizarre spectacle. Just as we were about to retreat and return to our camp, one of the members noticed us. They stopped their ritual and turned toward us with piercing stares, their eyes filled with an unsettling intensity. It was as if they could see through us, deep into our souls. Without a word, they beckoned us to join their circle. The fear that gripped us was palpable, and we realized we had stumbled upon something we couldn't comprehend. The group's strange energy was both captivating and terrifying. Ethan and I exchanged a silent, desperate look and made a hasty retreat, the eerie sound of their drumming and chanting fading as we put distance between us and the mysterious group. We found our way back to our campsite, where we packed up in a hurry. As we left the area, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something inexplicable. Who were those people, and what were they doing in the heart of the Smoky Mountains at night? The chilling encounter left us with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. These stories each provide a distinct and unsettling camping experience without resorting to supernatural or paranormal elements. They are designed to keep the reader on edge and create a sense of suspense and mystery while staying grounded in reality. Sixth Story, by Ryan Mitchell. My camping trip in the remote wilderness of Montana turned into a nightmare I could never have anticipated. I was an experienced outdoorsman and had camped in various locations across the state, but what I encountered during this particular excursion was beyond anything I had ever imagined. I had chosen a solitary campsite deep within the Lewis and Clark National Forest. It was miles away from the nearest town, and the isolation was exactly what I was looking for. The first day went without a hitch, and I set up my campsite with ease. I was thrilled to spend a weekend in nature with nothing but the sound of the wind and the rustling leaves. As the sun set, I gathered around my campfire, savoring the solitude. The night was quiet, and the stars above shone brilliantly in the clear sky. The forest around me was alive with the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. However, as the night grew darker, I began to notice a peculiar sensation. The air around me became charged with an unsettling energy. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, and a sense of unease settled over me. I decided to take a night hike, hoping to dispel the odd feeling. The moon was a slender crescent, and the trail was barely visible. The only sound was the occasional gust of wind through the trees. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I started to hear faint, rhythmic drumming. It echoed through the trees and seemed to emanate from the heart of the forest. It was a strange and hypnotic sound, unlike anything I had ever heard in the wilderness. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound, determined to find its source. The trail led me to a small, hidden glade, where I stumbled upon a group of people. They were dressed in ragged clothing, their faces painted with intricate designs. In the center of the glade, a bonfire blazed, and the group was engaged in a hunting ritual. Their chant was in a language I couldn't understand, and their movements were strange and ritualistic. It was as if I had stumbled upon a secret, ancient ceremony. I watched from the shadows, feeling like an intruder. The drumming and chanting continued, growing louder and more frenetic. The fire seemed to take on a life of its own, leaping and dancing wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the trees. Just as I was about to slip away, one of the group members turned and saw me. Their eyes locked onto mine, and it was as if they could see through me. A chill ran down my spine as they beckoned me to join them. Terror gripped me, and I turned and fled, retracing my steps along the trail. The drumming and chanting seemed to follow me, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if they were pursuing me through the dark woods. I finally made it back to my campsite, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. I packed up my belongings as quickly as I could and left the area, never looking back. The sound of the drumming and chanting faded into the distance, but the memory of that eerie encounter stayed with me. To this day, I have no explanation for the group's presence in the forest or the nature of their ritual. It was a nightmarish experience that left me with a sense of dread and a profound unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had joined them in that mysterious ceremony. Seventh Story by Lucas Anderson. My camping trip in the wilds of Oregon was intended to be an escape from the stress of everyday life. I had heard about a remote campsite deep within the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, and it seemed like the perfect place to find solace in nature. However, what awaited me there was an experience that would shake me to my core. The chosen campsite was situated by the banks of the Rogue River, surrounded by towering trees and the soothing sound of the rushing water. The first day was idyllic, as I set up my campsite and spent the afternoon hiking along the river's edge, taking in the breathtaking views. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods came alive with the songs of night creatures. I sat by the campfire, watching the stars twinkle above. The air was crisp, and the tranquility was a balm to my soul. After dinner, I decided to embark on a night hike, venturing deeper into the forest. The moon was full, casting a silvery glow on the landscape. The forest seemed to transform under the moonlight, its beauty taking on an eerie quality. As I wandered further into the darkness, I noticed an unusual phenomenon. The stars seemed to dim, and an ominous darkness shrouded the forest. It was as if a thick cloud had moved in, blotting out the night sky. An unsettling chill settled over me, and the rustling of leaves and the hooting of owls began to sound more menacing than soothing. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I continued down the trail, determined to quell my growing unease, when I heard a peculiar sound. It was a faint, mournful melody, carried on the night breeze. The haunting music seemed to resonate through the forest, sending shivers down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the eerie tune, determined to find its source. The melody led me to a small clearing, where I stumbled upon a group of people. They were gathered around a fire, their faces illuminated by its flickering light. The group was engaged in an unsettling ritual, their voices raised in a dissonant song. They swayed and danced to the rhythm of their chant, their movements eerie and hypnotic. It was as if I had walked into a scene from another world. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding, as the group's ceremony reached a fevered pitch. The fire grew more intense, its flames leaping higher, casting grotesque and otherworldly shadows on the trees. One of the group members turned and saw me. Their eyes locked onto mine, and it was as if they could peer into my very soul. The feeling was unnerving, and they beckoned me to join them in their ritual. Fear overcame me, and I turned and fled, making my way back down the trail. The eerie music and chanting seemed to follow me, growing louder and more ominous. It was as if they were pursuing me through the dark forest. Finally, I reached my campsite, panting and panicked. I packed up my belongings as quickly as I could and left the area, never looking back. The haunting melody and eerie chanting faded into the distance, but the memory of that enigmatic encounter remained. To this day, I have no explanation for the group's presence in the forest or the nature of their ritual. It was a chilling experience that left me with a profound sense of unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had joined them in that mysterious ceremony. 8th Story by Allison Miller. My camping adventure in the dense forests of Washington state had started as a dream come true. I had always wanted to immerse myself in the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest, and this trip was supposed to be the culmination of that dream. Little did I know that the woods held a chilling surprise for me. My chosen campsite was nestled deep within the Olympic National Forest, a place known for its lush greenery and captivating landscapes. The first day had been filled with hiking and exploration, and I reveled in the fresh air and the soothing sounds of the forest. As night fell, I lit a campfire and gazed at the stars above, their brilliance only rivaled by the silence of the woods. The tranquility of the forest was intoxicating, and I couldn't have been happier. That is until the night took an unexpected and eerie turn. After dinner, I decided to take a solo night hike along a trail that led deeper into the woods. The moon was partially obscured by clouds, and my flashlight became my only source of guidance. The familiar sounds of the forest felt eerier at night, but I pressed on. As I ventured further into the darkness, I began to notice an unsettling change in the environment. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My flashlight flickered intermittently, even though I had checked and replaced the batteries just before setting out. The trail seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I felt an increasing sense of isolation. The rustling leaves and occasional animal calls became more ominous as the night wore on. I began to question my decision to hike alone in the dark. Suddenly, I heard a distant, mournful wailing sound. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, and it sent a chill down my spine. The sound was haunting, echoing through the woods and filling me with dread. Despite my unease, I was determined to find the source of the sound. I followed it deeper into the forest until I stumbled upon a small clearing. There I discovered a group of people dressed in tattered clothing. They were gathered around a fire, and their faces were painted with eerie symbols. The group was engaged in a bizarre and unsettling ritual. They chanted in a language I couldn't understand, and their movements were strange and ritualistic. It was as if I had stumbled upon something ancient and otherworldly. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding, as the group's ceremony reached a fevered pitch. The fire seemed to respond to their chants, its flames dancing wildly and casting grotesque shadows on the trees. One of the group members spotted me and turned in my direction. Their eyes locked onto mine, and it was as if they could see into my soul. The sensation was unnerving, and they beckoned me to join them. Terrified, I turned and fled, retracing my steps along the trail. The eerie wailing and chanting seemed to follow me, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if they were pursuing me through the dark forest. I finally made it back to my campsite, panting and panicked. I packed up my belongings as quickly as I could and left the area, never looking back. The haunting wails and eerie chanting faded into the distance, but the memory of that mysterious encounter remained with me. To this day, I have no explanation for the group's presence in the forest or the nature of their ritual. It was a chilling experience that left me with a profound sense of unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had joined them in that enigmatic ceremony. 9th Story by Michael Carter. My camping trip to the remote wilderness of Wyoming was meant to be a much-needed escape from the daily grind. The vast expanse of the Wind River Range promised solitude and adventure. What I encountered, however, was an experience that would haunt me for years to come. I had chosen a campsite near the Wind River, and the first day was filled with hiking and exploring the rugged terrain. The evening was serene, and the sky was filled with stars. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant rush of the river. As night fell, I sat by the campfire, savoring the solitude and the beauty of the surroundings. It was a perfect moment for self-reflection, and I reveled in the peace and quiet. After dinner, I decided to take a night hike, hoping to explore the wilderness under the moon's soft glow. The moon was nearly full, and the trail was bathed in its silvery light. The quiet of the woods was both soothing and eerie. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the temperature began to drop unexpectedly. It was a clear summer night, and there was no reason for such a rapid change in weather. My flashlight flickered despite having fresh batteries, leaving me in darkness for brief moments. The rustling of leaves and the hooting of owls became more menacing in the dark, and I felt a growing sense of unease. The woods felt different at night, and the shadows seemed to come to life. As I continued my hike, I heard a strange, faint hum in the distance. It was a sound unlike any I had heard in the wilderness, and it sent shivers down my spine. The eerie hum seemed to surround me, coming from all directions, and I couldn't determine its source. I was determined to uncover the origin of the strange sound and followed it further into the forest. The hum grew louder and more ominous, and I could feel the vibrations in the air. It was as if the woods themselves were resonating with this eerie noise. The hum led me to a clearing, where I stumbled upon a group of people. They were standing in a circle around a fire, their faces covered by masks. In the center of the clearing, the fire blazed with unnatural intensity, casting eerie and elongated shadows. The group was engaged in a strange and unsettling ritual, their chant incomprehensible and unnerving. They moved in a synchronized, ritualistic dance, their bodies contorted in strange postures. It was as if I had stumbled upon an otherworldly ceremony. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding, as the group's ceremony reached a fevered pitch. The fire's flames leaped higher, and the eerie hum intensified, growing more dissonant and unsettling. One of the group members turned and spotted me. Their masked face seemed to fixate on me, and they beckoned me to join them in their ritual. Fear overcame me, and I turned and fled, making my way back down the trail. The eerie hum and dissonant chanting seemed to follow me, growing louder and more ominous. It was as if they were pursuing me through the dark forest. I eventually made it back to my campsite, panting and panicked. I packed up my belongings as quickly as I could and left the area, never looking back. The unsettling hum and eerie chanting faded into the distance, but the memory of that bizarre encounter stayed with me. To this day, I have no explanation for the group's presence in the forest or the nature of their ritual. It was a nightmarish experience that left me with a sense of dread and a lingering unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had joined them in that enigmatic ceremony. 10th Story, by Olivia Foster. My camping trip in the rugged backcountry of Idaho was meant to be a thrilling adventure, an opportunity to escape the constraints of urban life. I had chosen a remote campsite deep within the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, a place known for its stunning landscapes and rugged terrain. Little did I know that I would encounter something beyond my wildest imagination. The first day was full of exploration, as I set up my campsite and ventured into the wilderness. The beauty of the Sawtooth Mountains and the pristine lakes left me in awe. The evening was tranquil, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. As night fell, I lit a campfire and sat by its warm glow, gazing at the stars above. The moon was a slender crescent, and the night was clear and filled with the serenity of the wilderness. After dinner, I decided to take a solo night hike along a trail that led deeper into the backcountry. The moonlight cast a soft, silvery glow on the landscape, and the wilderness took on a new dimension in the dark. The solitude was both exhilarating and eerie. As I continued down the trail, I began to notice an unusual phenomenon. The stars in the night sky seemed to dim, and the darkness deepened around me. It was as if a shadow had fallen over the land, blocking out the natural light. An unsettling chill settled over me, and I felt a growing sense of isolation. The forest seemed to press in around me, its towering trees casting eerie shadows. The rustling leaves and the distant calls of animals became more disconcerting in the darkness. I pressed on, determined to shake off my unease, but the sense of isolation and the bizarre darkness persisted. The trail seemed endless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, I heard a peculiar sound in the distance. It was a faint, eerie melody, carried on the night breeze. The haunting tune seemed to resonate through the forest, and I couldn't determine its source. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the eerie music, determined to find its origin. The melody led me to a small clearing, where I stumbled upon a group of people. They were dressed in peculiar attire, and their faces were hidden behind masks. The group was engaged in a disconcerting and unsettling ritual. Their chant was in a language I couldn't understand, and their movements were strange and ritualistic. They danced in an otherworldly manner, their bodies twisting and contorting as if guided by some unknown force. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding, as the group's ceremony reached a fevered pitch. The fire in the center of the clearing blazed with unnatural intensity, casting eerie and elongated shadows on the trees. Just as I was about to slip away, one of the group members spotted me. Their masked face seemed to lock onto mine, and they beckoned me to join them in their eerie dance. Terrified, I turned and fled, making my way back down the trail. The eerie melody and disconcerting chanting seemed to follow me, growing louder and more haunting. It was as if they were pursuing me through the dark forest. I finally made it back to my campsite, panting and panic-stricken. I packed up my belongings as quickly as I could and left the area, never looking back. The haunting melody and unsettling chanting faded into the distance, but the memory of that enigmatic encounter remained with me. To this day, I have no explanation for the group's presence in the forest or the nature of their ritual. It was a nightmarish experience that left me with a profound sense of unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had joined them in that enigmatic ceremony. Thank you for watching whole video. Check this video you see on the screen, it's one of my favorite. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and smash that like to support my free and daily content for you. If you enjoyed this video, drop a comment and tell me what story got you chills.